Hello and welcome to another edition of PORA Raw. I'm David Russell and I'm here with my co-host, David Paulman. What's up, David?
How's it going, Russell?
I'm good, man. Crazy week. I had a lot of schoolwork to get turned in this week. I had not turned any of it in, if you know what I mean, for two classes until the day it was due. So now that's not to say I didn't have some stuff done, but I didn't have it all done.
That's interesting because you were ahead of me in the class that we were taking together, but like I had everything turned in for that almost 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, well, you know what? I did get into a car accident,
Oh,
you know,
again?
and I
Again?
do have a newborn. Yes, again, twice in this year now. I have been in two car accidents this year. 2020 has not been nice to me as long as just like everyone
2020 hasn't
else.
been nice to anyone.
I know, isn't it crazy? But like, I actually was driving down the road after teaching the youth at youth group, you know, and I'm driving down this my nice windy road, back road to get to my house, and this little deer pops out right in
Oh.
front of me. Little female doe just comes right out in front of me. I can't swerve to miss her because somebody's coming from the opposite direction. And then the only thing I could really do is to slow down and hit her at about 30 miles an hour. But it was just I knocked her into the person's driveway that across the street. But she got up and walked away, so she wasn't dead. Well, I was happy about because I
So,
don't like
so
killing deers.
you didn't
Unless
kill
I'm gonna eat
Bambi's
them.
mother then?
No, no, unless I'm gonna eat them. That's the only only time. But no, yeah. So it was just enough to cost about $500 for me for my deductible for my
Oh,
insurance, but it was about total over probably about $1,500 total. So yeah, at 30 miles an hour, you hit a deer, you're still going to collect a lot of damage. So yeah, I've been dealing with that and other things, newborn and all that stuff. We got a lot going on here at this house. So
life's been
I
hit.
actually got a birthday party right after this today.
Oh, nice.
My son has turned 5. So, but anyways, enough about me and the craziness that's going on in my life. We've got a special guest with us today, and her name is Erin Burnett. Introduce yourself, Erin.
Hello, yeah, my name is Erin. I'm originally from Northern Ireland, but I'm currently studying in Scotland. I'm a theology student and I'm doing a master's in practical theology.
Awesome, awesome. And we met through Skeptics and Seekers, and we had this interview with you, and we got the David Johnson version. Now I want to kind of like switch gears and kind of push back on some of the things that maybe we talked about there, but also get your story and kind of introduce you to this audience because this is more of a debate type channel. And I just wanted to do that, and this is what we're going to do today. So this is a different PRA role. Usually we're critiquing videos, but today we are going to talk and interview Erin on her view. Right, David?
That is the plan, yes.
Yeah, you just muted your mic, so I made you have to unmute it real quick. But anyways, yeah. So Erin, why don't you tell us what a little bit about your view? And like I said, this is about can a Christian be agnostic? So, Erin, can you just fill us in on what your view is and how how you can be a Christian and an agnostic?
So there's various different names for my theological view. Like some people call it Christian agnosticism, some call it theological non-realism. That what you actually call it doesn't matter. Essentially, so I am a Christian in the sense that, well, I identify as a Christian. I go to church at least once a week. I'm studying theology. I try and model my life after the way of Jesus. However, when it comes to the supernatural aspects, I am firmly agnostic. So things like the bodily resurrection of Christ or the virgin birth, I don't say that it didn't happen. I just say we can never know for sure either way. In many ways, I wish I had the faith that I could just say, yes, absolutely, I believe it. But unfortunately, despite my best efforts, I don't. I even I went to an evangelical theological college for my first degree, so it's not for a lack of trying.
Okay. David, you got anything on that?
Yeah, just one question of clarification. When you say that we can't know for sure, are you using that to, say we can't know with certainty, or are you saying we couldn't even have like a probabilistic sort of knowledge of these things?
We can have a probabilistic knowledge. I suppose that's the quest of the historian. But we can never know 100%, short of having a time machine, what actually occurred 2,000 years ago in Judea. I am very familiar with the arguments on both sides, and I do think both sides make some pretty good arguments, which is why I'm stuck in the middle. So.
Right on. Yeah, you have something to say, David?
No, that was it.
That was it? All right, so Erin, tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to this view here.
So my Christian background is absolute chaos. So I was raised in like a mainline Christian household. My parents are wonderful people, and they're proper Christians, unlike me. But when I was a teenager, it was quite a down period in life, and it's when you're in a low period that often fundamentalism becomes extremely appealing, because I suppose it gives you control in an otherwise uncontrollable universe. So I joined a fundamentalist sect towards the end of school and was in it for about almost 3 years. Very Calvinist, King James only, young earth creationist, the whole shebang.
Right.
And I don't wholly regret it. I mean, it was a necessary part of life, and the people were very nice, genuinely. But unfortunately, towards the end, I became a little bit disillusioned with some of the theology. So then when I went off to theological college, it was just a natural break. And then I started attending a evangelical Anglican church while I was at college. It was actually studying theology that made me really reevaluate everything. Despite the fact, as I said, it was an evangelical college, they were teaching with an aim to make us super Christian. But even despite that, I couldn't hold on to it. It was things like how painfully arbitrary church history seemed to be, and, discovering biblical criticism, being introduced to John Shelby Spong, who is probably persona non grata in apologetic circles. Yeah, all of that basically led me away from a supernatural view of the faith. But I didn't leave the faith altogether because I didn't want to. I love Christianity, and I mean that sincerely. I love going to church. I love the story of Jesus and the Bible, etc. That's why I am still studying theology, despite my views having vastly changed in the past 10 years. But that roughly gets us to where we are today.
Roughly, right on. Well, yeah, as we talked about on Skeptics and Seekers, I have a similar background as I went to a fundamentalist church too for longer though. It was about 7 years. And that was truly a good experience because like you said, the people are nice and you love the people, but it kind of makes you disillusioned at the end. And I remember one time I was sitting in the chair and listening to the pastor, and he was talking about this miracle that occurred, about how this guy was walking along the road and he got hit by a car, right? So this guy got hit by a car. His guts are like hanging out. His guts and entrails. You like my attempt for a British accent there? But no, and this pastor just was driving by and happened to see it, got out and put his guts back in and prayed over him, and he was healed. So I went over to the pastor because I thought that story was really cool. I mean, if that really happened, that would definitely, be documented somewhere, or something. So I asked him where he got his source from, and he couldn't tell me. And that was kind of like the first thing that it kind of raised a red flag. Well, why doesn't he know? I mean, did he get this from somebody else telling it and then somebody else telling it? And, it's just, it kind of started opening my eyes to a lot of the craziness that goes on in very fundamentalist, charismatic areas. Now, we weren't Calvinist, which I thank God for. David would have some words on that. But so how agnostic are you in a probabilistic degree? I mean, you say we can never know for sure. So, and this is David's area too. So I'm going to let him kind of take over here just for a second, because I know he wanted to follow up with that. But yeah, how probabilistic are you in that regard then? I mean, where do you land on it?
Now, my views are continuously changing, and they will keep changing as I study more. At the minute, I pretty much live as if I was an atheist, but I am not closing off the possibility of the supernatural. I just don't see it. So, whatever that makes me.
All right, David. Well, you just there you go.
There we go. Got it figured out. No, yeah. I think that's interesting. Could you, you seem, it sounds like what you said there is then that you seem to think that it seems more probable that there's not the supernatural aspect there, but there's still a part of you that wants it to be there. Is that how I'm understanding it?
Yeah, I mean, who wouldn't want the idea of there being a loving God who has a plan for us all, and that we're going to go to heaven after we die, except me, because I'm a heretic, I'm going to hell. Things like that, who wouldn't want them to be true? And, I still hope they are. I cannot say for certain. Gotcha. Unfortunately, I'll probably frustrate you, because my answer to most questions is just going to be, I don't know.
Right. And well, I mean, I would agree with you in a certain sense, and I'll probably get a lot of Christians mad at me at this point, but I would agree with you that we can't know these things for certain. And my own epistemology, it's evidentialist. Well, as the viewers will know from the last episode that we did. So pretty much everything to me is known in varying degrees of probability. And with regard to Christianity, it's a religion of history. So if it's true, that's going to be, at least our level of confidence in it is going to be directly proportionate to the historical evidence that we have. And you said that you're familiar with that. You don't have to put a number on it, of course, but how compelling would you find that in a way? Like, does it make you think at all? Is there something there, or like maybe a typical historical resurrection argument? Do you think something like that there's pretty easy answers to that sort of an argument?
So how compelling do I find the arguments for the resurrection?
Or yeah, just general historical arguments for maybe the reliability of the New Testament, or you could restrict it to the resurrection of Jesus. I know there's different ways of getting there, but we could just take the resurrection of Christ if you want. How compelling do you find that?
I mean, they're compelling enough that I absolutely believe you can be a fully rational person and believe it. I just find the naturalistic explanations, I just think they're more probable with what we observe in the world.
So probable relative to our background knowledge?
Yeah, so for example, the resurrection appearances of Christ, which in the earliest Gospels and the letters of Paul, they are visions. The whole idea of Christ bodily appearing to the disciples doesn't come along until the later Gospels, several decades later. So the idea of Christ appearing to people in a vision, I 100% believe that happened, and the disciples were sincere. However, that could easily be explained by post-bereavement hallucinations, which are a very common occurrence. I mean, equally, it could have been supernatural. My point just is, how do we know?
Right. So I hear that there. So you would say that there is enough evidence you could see that a person could be rational. So believing in it is not irrational. It sounded like you said that you said that you think a naturalistic explanation would be more, I guess, harmonious with what we observe in the natural world. So I wasn't sure here, are you saying that if it's a miraculous occurrence, the probability of it is just like so low based on everything else that we know that these are going to be more probable explanations? Or were you just saying that in like the specific case of the resurrection that we just have better reason to think that this could be explained in a different way? And again, if you don't have a a firm answer on that. That's fine. I'm just trying to see where you're at on this.
I suppose ultimately, was it Occam's razor that says the most simplest explanation is the most likely to be true?
Yeah.
And I do think naturalistic explanations are more simple. I think to believe in the resurrection, it requires what Kierkegaard called a leap of faith, which I unfortunately just can't take.
Now, what if you took like God's existence to be demonstrated on other grounds? So, like, if you took the resurrection, if you put that aside for a moment, and you think that you have good reasons to think that God exists from maybe a cosmological argument, teleological argument, something like that, do you think in that case it becomes more reasonable to believe in the resurrection if that's part of your background knowledge? If like you already have the belief that a God exists who would have the capabilities to do that, does that if you had that in place, would that make it easier to, as you say, take that leap of faith with regard to the resurrection or any other miracle claim?
Well, yeah, if you're coming from a theistic point of view, particularly classical theism, where God is all powerful, well, yeah, of course, if God can do anything, then anything is possible. I suppose I could be really annoying and ask you to define God, because every Christian seems to define God differently.
And it is very difficult to do, actually, if you think about it. From the classical theist point of view, and I'd be more of what's considered neoclassical theist, because I think that's the same as a form of theistic personalism. But I do believe that God is a person. So, but having, the attributes traditionally attributed to God, minus weird ones like impassibility and such.
Yeah, impassibility, that was one of the things that threw me in college. It made no sense how God can be loving as well as impassible. What?
Yes. I've never been on the impassibility train, and I was raised in a denomination similar to what you had described, being very rigid in that way, and so we weren't really precise in our theology. But when I think we lost her.
I'm here.
Hello?
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here. Yep.
All right.
We're
At least for me, Erin's video just cut out, but that's all right. If she's still on. Oh goodness, I forgot where I was going with that. No, yeah, I was saying, but yeah, when I was studying this, when I started getting more precise in my own theology, and I came across divine impassibility, I was just like, and for anyone who's not familiar with that term, that, as I understand it, it's the doctrine that God cannot be moved or affected in any kind of emotional way by the actions of his creatures or something in the world. And there's probably a better definition of it than that. But yeah, when I came across that doctrine, I was just like, that is so contrary to everything that I believe God is.
Yeah, so, okay, I'm glad we're agreed that classical theism has some problems. Yeah.
Well, any human construct of this is going to have its issues. But Erin, one thing that really just jumps out at me is this idea of holding a rational or saying that Christians are rational in holding their belief, and then there's the you still choose naturalism. I mean, if you got two rational positions and you love Christianity so much, why not go with the other rational opinion? What stops you from that?
Because it would be intellectually dishonest for me personally, and well, we could drive the conversation in this direction because I spoke about it a bit on Skeptics and Seekers. For me, the autism element definitely comes into play. I'm extremely logical to a fault. I'm empirical to a fault. So essentially, unless I can empirically experience it, then I can't have faith in it, essentially.
Gotcha. David, you want to follow up with that?
No, I was thinking
Right.
about it, but yeah, I didn't have any questions on it.
There's a couple other areas I want to cover that you said, but I do want to talk about the autism thing. How does autism affect your idea of belief and stuff like that? And I know you're saying that it makes you more empirical, but what else could be elements that can keep somebody from autism? Because I think it's important for us to know, and for everybody to know, about how autism affects people like that, you know?
So first of all, I absolutely do not speak for all autistic people because we're all extremely different. There are various studies that show, on average, autistic people are much more likely to be either atheist or agnostic compared to the general population. And I can send you some of these studies if you want to prove I'm not just pulling this out of thin air.
We could put it in the description.
Yeah. So there was one study from the University of British Columbia, and it found that whenever autistic people speak of God or believing in God, it's more of a concept than a person. So kind of like the God of John Shelby Spong. That God is not a person, that is just a concept. Another study found that autistic people tend to think anti-teleologically, which means we don't see overarching meaning, it just is. So for example, this is a very basic example, but if I did well on an exam, perhaps someone who thinks teleologically would say, oh, God was really with you in that. Whereas I would just be like, nah, I put the effort in, I got the result, A plus B, that's it. There's no external intervention required, it just is. And that's how I view a lot of things, particularly the problem of suffering. You know, I don't seek to try and find a reason for suffering. I just think it's a brute fact of the universe. It just is.
All right. David, you want to follow up with anything on that?
Quick question on that, and this is still something I'm working through, so I'll be interested to see if what your answer on this is. But when you talk about simplicity and explanation, one argument that some theists will bring against naturalism is that it's not actually that simple at all, because it has to posit, like literally thousands, even millions of brute facts. So you have so many things that are just so. Whereas in theism, you're really positing one. You're positing that God is the ultimate reality. So what would you make of sort of that kind of an argument for theism, that theism actually is a simpler explanation because it's positing everything, in this one mind, this one being God, as opposed to naturalism, which, like everything's physical, that's a brute fact, suffering, that's a brute fact, intelligence and rationality, that's a brute fact, and you just got like everything terminates in something natural, and there's so many different things that you just got all of these different brute facts. And so that's actually the argument goes, at any rate, that's a much more complicated explanation for reality.
I think a lot of it comes down to evidence. So we could go back to the example of the resurrection. We have loads and loads of evidence proving that post-bereavement hallucination happens, and it happens a lot. We have zero evidence of people rising from the dead. Of course, the fact that we don't have evidence for it doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means, on probability, I'm going to go with the evidence.
Right. Now, what if we brought up a counterexample, something like, but do we have evidence of people actually, believing these sorts of experiences, that the person actually come back from the dead? Because it seemed to me that, at least from my own study on this, that the probability on that is much lower, that most people do not come to the conclusion that, even in their grief, that this person they saw, they don't have a long-term belief that that person came back from the dead. Would that be a relevant, counterexample?
Yeah, I mean, some do, some don't, but also, we're living in a naturalistic, on a whole, secular world. Way back 2,000 years ago, when we didn't have such rationalist explanations, I think people would have been much more likely to jump on a supernatural explanation. Just like epilepsy was thought to be demon possession because they didn't know otherwise.
Right.
Go ahead, David.
All right. So then on that particular piece of evidence, then you would see these as both possible explanations, but then one that we have better reason in regard to, just the grief on their part of seeing him again, that would be a better or an explanation that comports better with our experience. And I mean, I might even be willing to grant that on that, particular piece. That's why, there's other pieces of evidence that I think that explanation would not explain. But
go into it, David.
Yeah, hit me with the evidence.
Yeah, this is what we're here for.
Convert me.
I'll try. And I'll say I have not studied evidence for the resurrection in about like 3 years now. I've been on other topics, so I might be rusty here. But an obvious one that comes to mind would be something like the empty tomb. So if you want to posit that, the explanation for seeing Jesus risen again, the explanation for that is that, that they have this sort of grief after his death, then, how will we explain the physical evidence of the empty tomb? Or is that even not something that you're willing to grant for the case because you don't think the evidence for the empty tomb itself is all that good?
Well, first of all, I've been to Jerusalem and there are 2 empty tombs and I can't agree over which one it is, but that's kind of a side point.
Probably neither of them, in my opinion. I go with Mark Strauss's view that it was almost certainly whatever tomb it was would have been destroyed a long time ago.
Yeah. With that regard, I think I'm with Bart Ehrman in that the whole empty tomb tradition was a later development. Paul doesn't mention an empty tomb. It only comes along later. In fact, the most likely explanation is that crucified victims were just thrown into a mass grave. But again, there's no solid evidence either way.
So when we got a few points on that, then let's go to. Goodness, I am really rusty on this. So we've got testimony of women. That would be one thing. Is if you say the tomb is a later legendary development, then you have to give an explanation for why it is that women are said to have discovered the empty tomb.
Well, there's quite a simple explanation. That's women were charged with caring for dead bodies, not men. So, of course, it would be women because that was their job. It would make less sense if it was men.
But to have them discovering the tomb, because it's not like, because in the story that we have of the women discovering the empty tomb, this is something, Jesus is already sealed up in the tomb. So they're not, coming to, or they're going to need, they're talking about how are they going to even, get to the body and get, because there's a big stone in the way. So it's not like you had to make this up. If you wanted to have the story of the tomb being discovered empty, there doesn't seem to be any reason to have it come across the way that it's told, because it's not like we just have the women tending the body before it goes in the tomb. This is something about after it's in the tomb. So I'm not sure if that explanation quite accounts for it.
Yeah, fair enough. Although that's another contradiction between the later Gospels and the earliest letters of Paul, because Paul, forgive me, I can't remember if it's Galatians or 1 Corinthians, but in one of them he says that Christ appeared first to Peter, then the 12, then the 500, then to Paul. No mention of women whatsoever. Yet some of the Gospels say that Jesus appeared to the women before he ever appeared to the disciples. So,
but doesn't that kind of go to strengthen the idea that you would not have made up women as doing it? Whether or not that really happens, right? So maybe Paul's giving us a more accurate account or something that didn't happen. But on the other hand, if as is commonly believed, that people in that day did not take the testimony of women seriously. In fact, it was, we know that Celsus brought that up against Augustine as like, this is a big argument against the reliability of your prime witnesses, is that they're women. That's just how people thought back then. It would make perfect sense for Paul to leave that out. Why would he be mentioning women if that's something that was going to count against his argument? So it actually, in a way, could go to strengthen the case that he left that out.
I think it's more probable too, and this is my whole idea of, I would like to get Erin's view here on how she comes across history, because when you're looking at history, you're putting a lot of evidence together, and we see that the evidence in the ancient world is that women aren't reliable witnesses. So why would they put them in there at all in the Gospels, which are still within the time of Paul's writings and the lifetime of the eyewitnesses, right? I mean, Paul's writing in the 40s and 50s. We know, we can talk about dating of the Gospels, early dates, and argue whether they're early or later. Even if we go with 70 for Mark, we still got this idea of, there's only about 15 years in between these guys writing. They would be able to contradict each other at some point. The evidence of history saying that we actually know that they didn't accept women's testimony. Uh, um, I think that strengthens the case. I mean, what do you think, Erin? I mean, what is your view on history in that regard? Because you said you were really evidence-based, and I want to know, are you going to accept the history for what it is, or is there something else that we're missing?
But again, how do we know it's history and not a story? Particularly when, I know this doesn't fully prove my argument, but when the earliest sources don't mention it, and it's only later sources that mention it, how do we know that this is historical fact and not just a later story?
Well, a couple points on that, I think, is that, first of all, Paul isn't he's not, trying to write narrative here. And I would even go as far as to say, I do think he implies the empty tomb in 1 Corinthians 15, when he states that, Jesus, he says he was buried. So I think, an empty tomb is clearly implied in that.
Or a mass grave.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know how.
Not the mass grave that the Romans would have used, because the bodies wouldn't have been buried; they'd have been exposed.
Right.
So the simplest explanation would have been a burial of some sort.
Right. So
which would have involved, if he's Jewish, it would have involved 3 types of tombs, right? It would have required the rich type of tomb, like we see in our Eastern narratives, right? It would have also implied the Lazarus type tomb, which is has the soul window and so forth, and then the cheap man's tomb, right? So I mean, it would imply buried would imply in a Jewish context a tomb, right, David?
I think that is correct.
Oh, and so Erin wants to go. Erin wants to go real quick.
Sorry,
ladies first.
Another argument which you can tear to pieces, which I have, that sort of suggests that the empty tomb story is a later fiction, is the character of Joseph of Arimathea. I think there is good evidence that he was not a real person. For example, first of all, Arimathea isn't a town. Archaeologists haven't found it. And I think it was Spong said that the best translation of Arimathea is just best disciple. So Joseph, the best disciple, sounds like a made-up character.
Yeah, so a couple of responses on that. So, there are arguments both ways on whether Arimathea has been found or not, but showing that it has not been found, that is not in and of itself a proof that it didn't exist. And additionally, people didn't always take their names from, a town, so this could conceivably be something other than a town. I think an argument for thinking that it probably is not something that's made up is the fact that Joseph of Arimathea is said to have been a part of the council that condemned Jesus to death as well. That, to me, doesn't seem something that is, you would make up as a Christian, is that you're going to say, oh, well, the person who treated Jesus right was this guy who was also on the council that condemned him to death. Now, Luke tells us, of course, in his account that, well, Joseph wasn't there when they took the vote, but still, having him associated with the very council that condemns Jesus to death, there doesn't seem to be any clear reason why someone would make that up to me.
And David, you were also commenting on the earlier argument that she made, and we were talking about what was it? The empty tomb in general. You remember what you're going to say on that?
Oh yeah, well, she said she argued, how do we know it's historical? I was saying one argument that it is the presence of women there. The response that she gave on that was that well, women took care of dead bodies, but in this case we're talking about a body that's already been taken care of, and instead we're having the story of the discovery of a tomb that's already been sealed, that's been opened. There doesn't, if you're making up the story, there's not any reason to posit witnesses that everyone thinks is unreliable. Well, I think that is an argument for thinking it's historical.
I also think that we have to look at the idea that this isn't just something that's made up. These guys are writing Greco-Roman biographies, and it's in that form of literary genre that is a Greco-Roman biography. Am I correct on that?
That's my opinion.
I mean,
Craig Keener just wrote this huge poem I just got called Christobiography, where he makes a case for that. That's not necessarily not everyone is willing to agree with that, but I do think that that's the mainstream view right now.
Erin, anything on those ideas? I mean, if we're looking at history, I mean, and you're going to hold that we can know anything from history, how can we tell then that not all of history is made up and we're actually should be skeptical, philosophical skeptical, skeptical of the world in general, right? Being we could be in the Matrix type of thing, right? I mean, if we're going to know, if we can know anything from history, how do you go about knowing things from history? I guess that's where I'm going. Sorry, I'm winging this because it's PORA Raw, so.
No, that's a very, very valid point. Yeah, exactly. If you take my view to its extreme conclusion, then yeah, nothing is real. We are in the Matrix. But for example, take the life of Julius Caesar. Most historians would say that stuff about battles and empire, etc., is likely to be true. There are also stories that Julius Caesar was born of a virgin. Very few modern historians actually believe that happened. And again, it comes down to naturalism versus supernaturalism. They tend to think, the natural stuff, probably. The supernatural stuff, most likely a story.
Yeah, and that's the thing is I think you have to look at every account of history on a case by case basis.
Mm-hmm.
Such as did Caesar cross the Rubicon, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would probably say yeah, he did. What's the best evidence for the resurrection of Jesus? And I think that I don't see any of the naturalistic explanations being able to really over trump what we actually have in history. I mean, there's a reason why these disciples come from this Jewish background and are willing to die for this belief that they saw this guy. And it's not just, I think Paul, even in 1 Corinthians 15, is promoting a bodily resurrection. I don't think the text allows us to go any other route.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously he appeared physically to somebody. So that notion is there, even as early as Paul. So I don't know. I think if I'm looking at history and I'm being a fair judge of history, I think that I have to go with the resurrection on it because, otherwise how can I really rely on anything from history at that point? But anyways, you got anything to say on that?
Well, in terms of, do we at least agree that his Jesus appearance to Paul wasn't bodily? Because doesn't Acts say that his travel companions didn't see Jesus? It was only Paul.
Yeah. I mean, it depends. I would have to say that the debate's out on that one because Paul does talk about he came to him. He actually came to him. So then one part in his letters it implies that he did see the risen Christ, and then in Acts it does seem more like to me a vision. David?
Well, I mean, yeah, and I don't think that what we are seeing in the case of Paul is directly comparable to what we're seeing in the Gospels, in the same sense, because if you take the view that the Gospel and Acts are substantially historically reliable, as I do, then already have Jesus ascended into heaven before he appears to Paul. So it wouldn't be surprising to me that the experience would be more, heavenly. And I don't know if I would say it is a vision, because we have this issue of the light and stuff when he appears to Paul and stuff. So is that the reason that they can't see him and only Paul can see him? And so we don't have all those sorts of details worked out for us. But suffice to say, I would say that the appearance of Paul is going to be in a less. Is going to be more glorious and more even visionary, if you would want to say, than
David, there is something to say on this point, is that, where we do have detail, we do have detail. Where we don't have detail, we don't have detail. And we got to kind of like look at it as it's given to us. So I think that's why, for me, the jury's still out on the type of encounter Paul had.
And that actually brings me back to another question that I kind of had here, which I would want to bring up, because you brought up the issue before of, maybe, the grief can account for why they had these visions. What about in the case of Paul? Do you agree that he really had a vision? Because I don't think you could invoke grief on his part, because he's a persecutor of Christians, right? Do you think he really had the vision that he describes? And then if so, what accounts for that?
Well, his wouldn't have been a grief one, yeah. So we have sort of evidence from Paul's writings that suggest he had some kind of illness, which is never defined. I know some people have suggested temporal lobe epilepsy or hypoglycemia, something like that. These things can trigger hallucinatory experiences. And obviously, if he was running around persecuting Christians, Jesus is on his mind. So I think the naturalistic explanation would be that either epilepsy or hypoglycemia or something else natural caused his vision.
And
again,
what about...
I'm not saying that is 100%. I'm just saying it is an explanation.
Right, and that might work, that might work if we have Paul, just by himself. But in his own account of it, that there are other people with him, that he experiences actual, blindness for a time until Ananias comes to him and has, the scales fall from his eyes and stuff. Is that all stuff Luke is making up, or do you think that is something that he actually, had some physical results from that, and that there were actually people with him that we know that they heard a voice, but they didn't see anyone? So is that all made up stuff, or was that actual a part of Paul's experience? Because if so, that seems to give some kind of objectivity to it, that there's elements of this being experienced by other people, and in that case I don't think you could chalk it up to just being something inside Paul's own head.
Well, this is another area in which the history that Luke writes contradicts with Paul's own letters, because Paul mentions, I think it's Galatians, that after his conversion, he didn't go to Jerusalem for 3 years, I think, because he wanted to prove the point that he wasn't just copying the disciples. He got the gospel himself. Whereas Luke's history says that Paul basically immediately went to Jerusalem. So, yeah, in that case, the two narratives don't quite line up. And I do think Luke and Acts in general embellishes certain things. So there are certainly elements of truth, like Paul converted, he went to Jerusalem eventually. But I think I'll take Paul's own writings over someone else's writings about him in terms of accuracy.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's all not a part of it then.
Again, I'll be annoying. Could be, could not be.
but you would lean towards the view that it's not part of it.
Yeah, and I mean, I have other arguments why I doubt Acts is blow by blow historically accurate. I think it's using embellished stories to tell a vaguely historical tale, but it's certainly embellished quite a bit.
As most history of that era is.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it's no secret. It's just the way it was written.
Gotcha.
All right. Well, I think as for me, I mean, I just see this. The simplest explanation would be for me that these events did occur. Even if you take a minimalist approach, I think it's more probable. I don't know why you would take from, the other fields, the other explanations over the Christian explanation. It's kind of hard to form a question that way, if you know what I mean. It's why. I mean, we just gave you a rational explanation, and you've kind of fell back on, well, it could be and it could not be. You're kind of in that position. Why not accept the other view? I mean, what's really stopping you from accepting the Christian view in a way?
I just don't think
You just
supernaturally.
don't.
I just don't.
All
I
right.
just can't see it. I don't have the sensus divinitatis that people speak of.
Well, I don't think yeah, and that's I don't think you have to have that to
I don't
know
have that.
truth. I don't. Yeah, I don't either.
I don't have that.
I don't. Yeah, I mean, I just all the evidence that leads up, to, especially in the case of the resurrection, I think is the best evidence we have from the evidence is that he rose again.
Yeah, I would want to fall back and try
If
to
I'm
look at
going
this.
to be evidentially, go ahead. Go
I
ahead,
want to
Dave.
look at this from maybe another perspective. What would you think then if we presented independent, good reasons for thinking that God exists? Would that in any way cause, the evidence for the resurrection to look more compelling to you, or do you think these naturalistic explanations that you've proposed that those would still be good enough to account for the resurrection and would make the best historical hypothesis, even if we already thought God exists?
I mean, yeah, if you can demonstrate that there is a supernatural entity beyond our natural world, then it does make things like that more probable.
Or just that you have good reason to, that there are relevant reasons for thinking that such a being exists. Because obviously, I'm also going to be with you that I don't think we could have certainty about the existence of God. I know I'm going to get more hate from some Christians there, but I don't think you
Only
can.
our precept fans.
And the Reformed
Oh, dear.
epistemologists too, yes.
Oh,
Couldn't be wrong about that. But yeah, no. So I mean, I do think that this is all. It's a matter of probability. So I mean, I'm always open to having my views changed by future evidence. I'm an evidentialist, but I do think that we at least have some reasons to think that God's existence is likely or probable, and that's my view on it. And I know at least for me that well, I do think the evidence for the resurrection is strong enough on its own. For me, it's even easier to accept that because I think I have independent reasons for thinking that God exists.
Yeah, although, to be blunt, it wouldn't really change the day-to-day reality of how I practice Christianity, because my form of Christianity, it's very influenced by the teachings of Jesus, particularly the Sermon on the Mount. I love the idea of building the kingdom of heaven on earth instead of just sitting around and waiting to die. And, he has lots of good teachings about, whatever you do for the least of these, you do for me. And yeah, for me, my faith is very practical and it informs how I behave towards other people in the world, really regardless of any supernatural doctrines that may or may not be behind it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and we're getting close to the end here. I just wanted to ask, and this is just a general question for all of you. It's kind of in the title. Can you be a Christian and an agnostic? I would personally say you really can't be an actual Christian if you're an agnostic in that way. David, what would you say?
I would say I can because I think I was one for the better 2 years of my life when I was 17 and 18. I did not know if God existed, and I could not give an answer on that because I didn't know at that time. It was something I was really questioning. I was trying to look at the evidence the best I could, but honestly I didn't know. So I was an agnostic, but I never lost my Christian faith. I always believed in Christ, even if it was one that I felt like I was gonna I might be losing at some point. I never stopped believing in it. There was never a time I stopped saying I was a Christian. I always wanted Christianity to be true. But yeah, there was a time where I just didn't know. And so if that is how we are understanding a Christian agnostic, as somebody who, is believing in Christ, but, really doesn't know, isn't sure, isn't confident. Yeah, I think confidence, that would be the main thing. If you are believing, even if you're not confident, you could be a Christian agnostic in that sense.
Very good, very good. And Erin.
Annoying answer. Depends on how you define Christian. If you define Christian as must believe every single point of the Nicene Creed, then I'm not a Christian. also half the Anglican Church isn't Christian by that definition. If you define Christian as a follower of Christ, then yes, I believe you can be a follower of Christ and be agnostic.
All right, so for the last part here, and this is kind of like the speed round, we're just going to give like quick answers and a couple reasons for it. It's going to be just kind of fun. I wrote up a little thing, and like I said, the rest of this was kind of on the fly and kind of winging it and just having fun, because this is what we do on PORA Raw. We just talk, or we critique videos. But yeah, so I think God is the best explanation for the beginning of the cosmos, which means I think the cosmological arguments are pretty strong. Erin.
Well, as a disclaimer, I haven't looked at the cosmological argument since I was in school, but again, one of the main posits of the cosmological argument is that infinite regress is impossible. To that I say, why? Why do we need a beginning? What if the universe is just continually in a cycle of expansion and retraction?
So you're going with the oscillating view
Yeah.
of the universe. Okay, all
but,
right.
But I don't know. I'm not a physicist.
It's okay. It's okay, David.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on this. There's some reasons to be skeptical of it is, well, first of all, my own view in epistemology. I'm a classical foundationalist, and classical foundationalism, starts from this idea that, well, look, we have certain beliefs that we infer from other beliefs, which we infer from other beliefs. And this kind of goes down, down, down. How far does that go if I ever want to be justified in, these original beliefs? Then there has to be a stopping point. So it's kind of understood that if, this were just beliefs going back infinitely, then, I would never have anything more than conditional justification for all of my beliefs. And that's unacceptable to me, just intuitively, that I would actually need actual justification. So from that point, I already don't like the idea of an infinite regress, at least for in terms of being justified. Now, that wouldn't prove that you couldn't actually have one, but I'm saying from that, I already don't like the idea. Some practical reasons to be skeptical of an infinite regress would be, first of all, we have like paradoxes that arise if you say that you can have an actual infinity. Hypothetically, if you can have an actual infinity, imagine you have, a library that has an infinite number of red books, infinite number of black books, and, you check out, one of the black books. We have kind of an interesting situation here. How would, it seems like you should have less black books in there than you would red books, even though, you'd still have an infinite number of both. So there just seems to be too many issues with saying that you could really have an infinity. There's the problem of how do we ever get to the present if the past goes on infinitely. Those may not be, conclusive proofs that you couldn't have an actual infinity, but it's enough to at least make me very skeptical of an infinite past.
And for you being an empiricist, Miss Erin, I'm surprised you don't at least know that pretty much everybody's rejected the oscillating universe. Every physicist doesn't hold to any oscillating type models anymore. But and there's a reason for it. Yeah, there's just not. Even Hawkins said there's only so much, right? So, and I would also piggyback. I think the successive addition argument pretty much defeats out the concept of an infinite regress. So I think it's very improbable mathematically. Especially when you got the top mathematicians saying that when we say infinity, it's not like we're saying there's infinite amounts of fish in the sea. They always say stuff like that because they try to differentiate the concept versus reality in that, because I don't think they believe that there's an actual infinity. But and move on to the next one. Erin,
to be fair,
back on this. Just I'm gonna let Erin respond real quick before we move on to the next quick question. Because I only want to give like 45 seconds to a minute for this.
My only response is I really don't know enough about maths and physics to properly comment.
Right on. But I think it's cool and it's reasonable to us to say that, I think it's reasonable, very reasonable. And this is because I love the subject. This has nothing to do with our argument or anything. That the universe did have a beginning. I think it's very probable. I think that's where the evidence is going is that the universe actually does have a beginning. Everything that the physicists say points to a beginning, even though they can't account for that or what was before that 1 billionth of a second, right? So, anyways, okay, so I think God is the best explanation for the fine tuning of the cosmos from the initial conditions of the universe to planetary conditions and the irreducible complexity we see in the cell. Meaning, I think the theological arguments are strong indicators of a designer. Erin.
Okay, this one, it doesn't quite convince me again, because I'm more like, okay, it just is. Yes, the conditions of the earth are perfect for life forms like us to evolve. But if the conditions were different, then okay, we wouldn't have evolved, but maybe some other type of life form would have. Like, you're wearing your Star Trek t-shirt. Isn't there an episode of Star Trek where they like find a life form that, oh, I've forgotten what chemical it's based on, but it's totally different to whatever chemical we're based on, and then Dr. McCoy is trying to work out how to perform surgery on it. And this is a complete tangent, but yeah.
Yes.
I'm a doctor, Jim.
And then there's the episode where the virus is silicon based and all this. Yeah, it's
yes,
really,
that's what I was thinking of. It was silicon based. Yes.
Yeah.
So exactly, if things had been differently, okay, fine, maybe we'd be silicon based.
But see, that's the thing that gets me real quick, Erin, is that that could be, but the evidence suggests that it's not. The evidence points saying that it's not. So I mean, there's a could be. Looks like you have a sensus divinitatis for naturalistic stuff. All right, go ahead, David. You got a response on the design argument there?
Yeah, I mean, I have always had, a long-standing skepticism of the argument from the fine-tuning of the laws of the universe. And the reason for that is because there's just no way to rule out chance on it. You can't do that. I don't think, and no offense, Erin, but just saying, oh, well, we wouldn't be here to, worry about it or even think about it if it wasn't that way. That just states that it is that way. But the argument is seeking an explanation for that. But like I said, I don't think you can rule out chance on that. I think it's something that fits much better in theism. If we say, would we expect on naturalism the universe to be finely tuned? Probably not. And on theism, yeah, we would. Can we absolutely rule out naturalism? No. So for me as a theist, it's something that fits very well in my worldview, but something that I can't really definitively answer the chance objection on. So I don't.
Well, David, we've already said certainty at 100% is kind of off the table. So what would you give probabilistically here?
The problem is there's nothing to measure it against in this case. I have nothing to I can't
So design so fine tuning and information and all that stuff doesn't suggest a mind, because everything we experience evidentially is that it does.
There's not information in the creation of the universe. So this is why I like getting to the biological design argument. In biological design, I can actually I have the whole entire everything else in the universe to use that against the information in the cell. Now this we're working inside the universe with conditions that I have access to, that I can measure these out. And so yes, I can say whenever information arises in my experience, it comes from a mind. So I have information in the cell. It's reasonable to posit that this came from a mind, because I have no reason to think that a natural process can do that. But I don't have that when we're looking at the fine-tuning of the universe, because I have nothing to compare it with, because I don't have other universes.
Sure you do. Watch Journey to Creation by Hugh Ross. But no,
sorry,
seriously.
2 seconds, I need to grab my laptop charger.
No, go ahead. Seriously though, we do have I did what I wanted to say is I did include the irreducible, the irreduced complexity in the cell. So I mean that fits, but with the entire design argument. So that's kind of like what I was going for there.
Oh yeah, no, I gotcha. And I mean, I like teleological arguments. I'm just saying in regards to the specifically the fine tuning of the universe.
You just haven't done enough study in that. We understand, heretic.
I've done study. I just there are no refutations to the chance hypothesis on that.
I think there's a probabilistic, but that's just me.
But the probability is it's always relative to something, and there's nothing to gauge this relativity to.
I don't know, man. I have to look more into it, but
I say it's something that fits better given theism.
Yeah, I do too, but I think there's good. I think the evidence flows that way.
Oh, for anyway. Sure, and especially when you combine it with something like a cosmological argument. So we're looking at something with a beginning and something that apparently looks designed. Case. Right. Then we start getting a much more convincing theistic argument in that case. But just the fine tuning alone, I don't know on that one.
Well, yeah, no argument stands alone, right? I think God is the best explanation for objective morality. Meaning, I think the moral argument is very strong in favor of a theistic personal God. Erin, what do you think on morality?
I think if you're looking for objective morality, certainly the Christian Bible is not the place to find it.
Oh,
salty.
All right. Well, David, what do you think on the top of your head here?
Well, I think there are a lot of really bad moral arguments out there. I don't like Craig's version of the moral argument because it doesn't connect God to morality at all. It's just like if God doesn't exist, then moral values and duties don't exist. Why? Is always what I'm thinking at that point. But I do think it's possible to construct a good moral argument if you look at it teleologically. So I would give a very teleological moral argument. That is, when we say something is wrong, when we say it's wrong to do something, then we mean it goes against the purpose of something, right? It's not wrong for me to smash a rock. Why? Because a rock has no purpose. It would be wrong for me to smash a child's head. Why? Because that goes against the purpose that child exists for. So when I think we're looking at morality in terms of purpose, then that presupposes design in the world, and so then that gives us an actual objective basis for saying that things are right or wrong. And so yeah, I mean, the atheist, in my opinion, they either have to say that like morality, it just is, it's just something that exists and we don't know why, even though no one has to live by it, and there's problems with that. Conversely, I think that makes sense in theism, so I'm on board with a moral argument as long as we're doing it as a teleological moral argument and not like a transcendental moral argument.
Yeah, I look at it more of like the moral realism argument, that is made. I think that's especially the one that Inspiring Philosophy does. He actually puts a really
he gives a much better one.
Mm-hmm. And our friend Swan Sona, he does a good one too, man. I really like it. Erin, anything else you want to say on it?
Well, I think the evolutionary explanation for morality, I think, is quite convincing. It also explains why different societies have developed slightly different codes of morals. So yeah, essentially, anything that contributes
really
to the overall good of the species becomes moral. So, for example, if you start raping and murdering people, that is not good for the overall growth of the species. And also, it causes immense pain. I'm a utilitarian, maximum happiness, maximum people.
I see David thinking over there. Go ahead, David. I'll let you.
Well, I just want to say, if you want to say evolution is the explanation for how we know morality, that does not challenge the moral argument. But are you saying that these things aren't actually, right and wrong? Are you saying that like rape and murder, that these things aren't actually wrong and they simply are not beneficial to one's survival?
Well, I just think we instinctively know that inflicting suffering, unless we're a socio or psychopath, inflicting suffering on other people is just not right, because we have developed as an empathetic species, much like apes have as well. And it just goes against every code of empathy to inflict suffering on other human beings.
Except apes throw poop.
Well, so do human children.
I was gonna say, is that something though that's like actually wrong in your opinion? That there's some reason that you shouldn't be doing this, or it's just something that you're programmed by evolution, not to not want to do? Because if you're doing the first one, then you still have to give an explanation of it. It's not enough to say, oh well, we evolved this way. That wouldn't explain why it is actually wrong. On the other hand, if you're just saying, oh, we just evolved this way to think that it's wrong, but it's not actually wrong, then that collapses into moral subjectivism.
No, and I think that is a very solid argument for theism, and it's why I'm not a total atheist. However, I'll go back to my beginning point on the Bible. I concede that God helps with objective morality. However, the Bible seems to go against that, because there are bits where we could talk about this for hours, but the Israelites are commanded to go and storm a city, kill everyone except take the virgins for yourself. That's rape, that's murder. Yeah, how does that gel?
Oh, that's rape and that's murder, huh? That's a little anti-Semitic, isn't it?
There are arguments.
Well, there is arguments against it. I heard one
Right.
funny one this week, and this is just for fun. Okay, this is just to have fun with. I did hear one this week, and this guy did actually accuse the guy for the whole slaughter of the Canaanites. He accused the guy making the arguments that it was wrong to kill the Canaanites an anti-Semitic response. And I was like, what? And then he explained, like, hey, these guys were passing judgment. He said, matter of fact, you're the racist. And he called the person the racist because he was actually saying that the person that was arguing for the death of the Canaanites being wrong was actually also promoting child sacrifice, rape, and the evil that the Canaanites did, and that Israel just basically judged them. I just thought it was really interesting. Like, so you're going to complain when God doesn't do anything about evil in the world, but then complain when God actually does do something about the evil in the world. It was just a wild argument. I heard that this week, and that's just for fun. Think about it. It's whatever. Erin, you did want to respond, though. Go ahead.
Well, I think thankfully there's pretty good, again, you're going to question me on how I get my history, but there's pretty good historic evidence that the conquest of the Canaanites was exaggerated in the Bible. I mean, it happened, but it certainly didn't happen to the scale that was described, because, I mean, the Canaanites kept existing. They weren't wholly wiped out, so, yeah.
Yeah, and that's where we'd also disagree there, is that I don't think God ordered them to wipe them out completely. I think that if we read the text correctly, we'll see that we do see the Jewish war language inserted in there, and I think I think you would probably agree that they did add those in there on purpose. I mean, that was just what they did. That was how they the decimation language and all that is always part of that war literature of the time. Go ahead, Dave.
One thing I would want to bring up on this is, and there are a lot of arguments with regards to like the specific things, right? Is there exaggeration? Is there hyperbole going on? In fact, I think there are even arguments that the talking about keeping the virgins for yourselves, there are actually good arguments to think that that is not a reference to rape. But although to me the biggest problem has always been the commands to kill the children, but putting all that aside, I don't think that should stop a person from embracing Christianity, because the doctrine of biblical inerrancy, although it is a doctrine that I hold, it is not in any way a necessary prerequisite to be a Christian. So, I mean, I'd say worst case, take the position of somebody like Greg Boyd, who he wrote, this whole 2-volume book on the Canaanite conquest, and he basically wrote, this stuff was bad. God did not command this, and the authors of Scripture were just wrong in thinking that God commanded them to do this. I would rather have somebody come to that position and, believe in Jesus than think that they have to, have answers to all of that before they can come to faith in Christ. You don't have to accept all of that to be a Christian. Now, I think that's something you could work through in your own Christian life. But, if you just come to the point that you can't accept that, don't let that stop you from being a Christian.
Well, I have read Greg Boyd and I like him a lot. And if I was to believe in God, it would probably be the God of open theism. I think that's what Greg Boyd
Heretic!
Yay! That's the least heretical thing I've said all episode.
And I have a lot of respect for Boyd as well. So,
okay, so at the end of the day, does anybody, Erin, do you have anything to say in closing here? Because we're wrapping up now, and we do have some exciting news after we let Erin give her final goodbye.
I think just to sum up that I think you're very intelligent. You make very good arguments. I'm not the standard guest that wants to destroy all your arguments. I'm just going to keep living out my faith as a day-to-day practical way of life, as opposed to a set of doctrinal propositions that may well change as I get older and study more. So I'm on a journey, to use the massive cliche.
And Erin, what's really cool about you is that, you're accessible, you're willing to talk about these issues, you're putting yourself out there, which could actually hurt your career.
Oh, absolutely. Career suicide.
But,
oh, well.
Yeah. But also, it's good to just work through these things together as people just talking through these type of things and giving arguments and stuff like that. But you are also an author. So tell us just a little bit about your book and your website so we can get that in the for if people want to know more about you, they can go and check your stuff out.
Yeah. So I wrote a book when I was in high school because I had no life. It's a fantasy novel for like middle school age children with a Christian message, and it was published by like an evangelical publisher. So don't worry, it's proper theology. It's not the sort of theology I've been spouting here. Yeah, and my website is erinburnettauthor.co.uk.
Awesome. Well, David, we got some exciting news for tonight, because this what's great about this episode is it kind of leads into a debate on naturalism versus theism. So stay tuned. Plug in tonight. I'm gonna try to go live tonight, guys. I'm gonna try to do this live. Okay, so I've been playing with OBS software. Yes, I'm promoting the brand. OBS is awesome. The studio, it's really cool. So I am going to do my best to get that moving and get us to do a live broadcast tonight. So stay tuned tonight. If not, you'll see it tomorrow. If I have technical difficulties, we'll see. I'm not perfect at this. I'm just a guy trying to figure all this YouTube stuff out. So anyways, David, you got anything else to close with? Why don't you just close us out?
Sure, yeah. Well, I would say, yeah, I am looking forward to the debate. It's going to be the two boys from Reason to Doubt, they've both been on the show before. They'll be taking the atheist side, and then we'll have Travis. He's taking up the theist side, tag teaming with Invoking Theism, which it's going to be his first debate. And if you know Invoking Theism, he's like 19 years old, and he's crazy smart. So this is his first debate. His channel is great, and so I'm really honored to have him on the channel, and I'm going to be excited to see what kind of work he does in this debate. Yeah, and so thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks, Erin, for being on, and y'all catch us next time.